So hello again. Today I'm going to show you the game number 2 on my top 10 favorite chess games list. This time it is again for the second time in a row played by Rashid Gibriatovich-Nezhmetdinov with white pieces against Oleg Chernikov. This game was played in 1964 on the USSR Team Chess Championship as far as I remember. And basically you have to see what happens because it's some real sorcery that happens over the board. And well, you will see for yourself. So without further ado, let's go forward. Nezhmetdinov had a white piece and started with e4. His opponent replied c5, Sicilian defense. And after knight f3, knight c6, d4, c d4, knight d4. This is known as an open Sicilian. This opening has a very good reputation, has been used so many times in the chess world. The aim of this is that black now has a central majority, so he has 2 pawns against 1 in the center, but white has one more, let's say has a more active piece and more space with his pawn. So that's some concession with black. Black played g6, which is a hyper-accelerated dragon. Black will put his bishop over on g7 and put a lot of pressure on white's queen side. Knight c3, bishop g7, bishop e3, reinforcing the knight in the center. It was attacked twice. So knight f6, bishop c4. Bishop c4 is very aggressive, often seen in the dragon variations, where this pawn on f7 may be a weakness. But this bishop also can contribute to the defense of the queen side. For instance, after it backs to b3, it not only defends the c2 and a2 pawns, but it also may shield the b2 pawn from the queen coming to b6, potentially in the future. So castles by black, and bishop to b3 was played, as planned. Also now the bishop will not be hit if the knight comes to e5, which is a common theme in these O lines. And now knight g4, a move which is pretty rare at this point. What people usually play in this opening is d6, which basically transposes to the mainline dragon, and after that white usually plays f3 to prevent this option and also to give more protection for the e4 pawn and maybe start preparing some h4 g4 ideas. This is actually the most common line, I think, to play against the Sicilian dragon. Just to briefly show you how it's played out. Basically, what happens is we have an opposite side castling, and white will go and try to blow black completely on the king's side, whereas black is going to maybe launch his pawns on the queen's side, or simply use his pressure with his rooks and bishops actively placed. It's different in many lines, but in here, because black played knight g4, white was not able to play the Yugoslav attack, which I just shown, and had to go for the other line. Knight g4 looks pretty dull because, okay, we just take the knight and, well, you are not winning a piece, of course, because knight takes d4. The knight is protected by the dragon bishop. And queen h4. Why was queen h4 played? It does not seem to make sense, but actually it's a very principled move. The threat currently is perhaps that this bishop is staring at this queen, which may make it a bit vulnerable in the future. For instance, if, let's say, white castled on the queen side, then of course after knight takes on b3, and knight takes b3, d5 could potentially be somewhat dangerous or equalizing, simply because this move happens with tempo, and say after the queen moves to h4, moves like d4 are possible, forking the 2 pieces. So that's avoided with move queen to h4 at this point. Queen a5, so putting pressure on white's queen side, as I said before. This knight is the focal point now, it's pinned, so white castles king side, not only gets his king to safety, but also unpins the knight. And now black actually plays a move which I would say shows draw intentions. Bishop f6 is basically a draw offer, because what's ultimately going to happen in like 99% of the games is that white will go queen to h6 and black will respond bishop g7, and after that white will either go back to h4 and repeat moves, or perhaps after bishop g7 he can go to g5, but then the queens are exchanged and let's say e6 is played, and there is really no advantage for white. Black has a central majority. I would even say that well, this is at least equal with no winning chances basically. And any other move is not so good. Let's say queen g3 actually loses immediately to this fork afterwards. Okay, let's just first take the knight, of course. I forgot about that. And you just give check and you new mouse, sorry, and you give up and you just win the queen like that, and black is much better here. Any other move like queen h3 or queen g4, like let's say queen h3, again d5 is a theme that makes this position hard to play for white because the queen is getting hit by the bishop. So that is why after the move bishop to f6, 2.Nezhmetdinov, as the legend says, thought for 40 minutes before he played the move which I guess no one would ever expect. And yes, believe it or not, but he played queen takes on f6, a move that, well, is blowing my mind whenever I see it. Even though I know this game for some time, whenever I see it, it's madness. Basically, it seems that there is no reason to give up the queen for the bishop. There is no immediate blow. But as you will see in a moment, well, there is something to it. Black did not take the queen immediately, which is actually pretty clever, because he realized that if he took the queen now, then of course he's losing this knight anyway. But now this bishop is quite active and the knight is ready to go to d5 and pressurize the pawn on f6, which is not very pleasant. That's why black simply played knight to e2 check and forced the knight to go back and waste a move, and only then did black capture white's queen. And the white here went back to c3. And well, it seems that white really has no compensation, but if you count the pieces, white actually has 3 pieces developed to only 1 black piece being developed. But what's also a theme, what else could 2.Nezhmetdinov had in mind, is this structure here around the king. You see that these dark squares are pretty weak and the light squares are occupied by pawns, which actually is quite tempting of a structure to attack, which you will see in a moment. But let's just imagine that this bishop here is on d4 and the knight is already on d5. This would be a devastating attack actually, because after the knight takes on f6 check, it forces the king to the dark square, and then after the knight moves again, actually it goes with a discovered check. So it may simply win a lot of material. Rook e8 was played. This is double intention, let's say. Not only does it attack the pawn on e4, but it also prepares rook e6 to protect this pawn, this weakness that will be a focal point in the moment. Knight d5 attacking this pawn and indirectly defending this one, of course, if black was to capture, and of course this check picks up the rook and white is winning. So Chernikov played rook e6, simply defending the pawn on f6, not allowing white to take it. Bishop d4, so now the pressure is increased. And well, king g7. There is no other way to protect the pawn. And here is some maneuver that I believe Chernikov missed and Nezhmetdinov spotted, because otherwise he wouldn't be able to sacrifice the queen and have any justification for it. He played rook d1, preparing to play rook d3, rook f3, and then intensify the pressure on f6. And what he calculated, and what is actually very interesting about this maneuver, is that there is no way for black to defend this pawn in 3 moves, which white rook will take to attack the pawn. Because there are no pieces to protect it except for the rook and the queen. The queen is useless to defend it because it's worth more than any of the pieces attacking. And this rook is not able to get here in 3 moves. There is simply no way to do that. So this pawn will fall, believe it or not. Chernikov decided to play simply d6. He's trying to get his pieces into play. So he will play bishop d7, bishop b5, or bishop c6 probably, and then free his rook. That's basically his idea to win the game. He's up a piece still. Rook d3 as mentioned. So 2.Nezhmetdinov is bringing his rook into action. Bishop d7 and rook f3. So now there are 3 pieces on f6. Only 2 pieces defending, but there is no way to shield it even more. So Chernikov develops his bishop even further with a threat. He attacks the rook on f1, but Nezhmetdinov simply lets it go. He first plays bishop c3, kicking the queen away, and also, well, first of all, yeah, simply getting the queen away from because it could potentially be dangerous on this line. So it went back to d8, also maybe adding some protection to the pawn, but it's really meaningless. And Rashid took on f6, sacrificing the rook on f1. Now here, the engine says that the position is equal, and what black should have played was rook c8, and he should attempt to sacrifice this rook for the bishop, and then the position kind of holds itself. The best move here is bishop takes on e6, and after f takes e6, let's say knight e8 is given the best move by the engine, and after king g8 it says repeat. But of course this is not the way humans think, and Chernikov played his bishop to e2, trying to hunt down the rook on f3, and what he missed was another tactic that came, because he probably thought that there are no good discoveries with this knight, that all of these moves lead to nothing, because okay, they are all with discovered check, but they threaten nothing. But actually Nezhmetdinov took on h7 with check from the bishop, and now black is in serious problem. He played bishop g8, but well, what if he took the knight, because that's probably what he expected he could do. But this time the move rook takes f7 wins on the spot. After rook takes f7, king h6, and bishop takes on e6, so grabbing a free rook. And basically, in terms of material, let's say after bishop takes on f1, this is theoretically better for black in material-wise, but these pieces are simply not playing, and these 3 are mating the black king. Bishop g7, what do you play? King h5, g4. And these pawns are simply coming to mate you. After king h4, let's say king takes f1. And what is this king doing on h4? How is it going to survive? Bishop to f6 is threatened to win the queen. There is no way black is defending. Let's say queen g8, simply rook e7, defending both bishops. And the position is hopeless. Bishop f6 comes next. What are you doing with this king? The best move given by the engine is queen takes c6. If anything else, let's say rook c8, trying to maybe get this piece into the game, or even better, if you try to do it this way, so rook e8, trading queens, then of course, trading rooks, you're losing the queen, and if you save your queen, say go to b8, then it's mate in 2 after bishop f6, king h3, and g4. It's not g4, sorry, or rook h7. g4 is also winning, but
checkmate.
Yeah. But let's just go back. So Chernikov cannot take the knight on h7, so he moved his king to g8. What else is there? Rook h3, preparing to basically deliver checkmate on h8 whenever possible. So you just move this knight away and give mate. Also coming to f6, possibly attacking the king with check. The bishop defends it. Here, Chernikov understood the danger of the rook and bishop coordinating on these weaknesses on the dark squares and played rook e5, which is immediately challenged with f4. This rook is not going anywhere and it can be hunted down at the price of one pawn. Here Chernikov, again, did not really understand the nature of the position, even though this is the second recommended move by the engine, simply to capture the rook on f1, which Rashid Nezhmetdinov recaptured. The better try here was to play rook h5, try to swap these rooks, but of course after knight f6, king f8, you understand that you give up the exchange at this point. But there was nothing better to do. Instead he took the rook on f1. After the recapture he played rook c8, and now this is the idea I mentioned previously. The black rook is willing to sacrifice itself for the bishop on c3, which is actually worth much more than the single rook. It's actually creating the mating potential against the black king, and that's why Nezhmetdinov moves it to d4, so that it's still on this active diagonal, but is not in danger of being captured by the rook on c3. So b5 was played. I think this is a desperate move. I don't really see the good explanation for it. Possibly, well, I mean, it's very hard to come up with any move. Let's say if you take the pawn, the knight f6, pretty unpleasant. It says give up your queen, the engine. If you move anywhere, basically you get mated instantly, after, or simply lose the rook. One of the two. So b5 seems to just be a move that's gaining space. He didn't have an idea, or maybe he was running out of time. Nezhmetdinov played knight g5, so making a way for his rook to come to h8. Also, now there is a threat of taking on f7, which is defended with the move rook c7. But here comes the finishing blow, I guess. If you want, you can pause the video, try to find it. I'll just show it immediately. Bishop takes on f7 check. So, okay, what are you doing? Rook can simply take, and it did. But now comes a brilliant move, rook to h8 check. Magnificent move. After king takes rook, knight takes rook. With a fork on all of three major pieces. King h7, knight d takes d8. And now we find ourselves in the endgame, in which white has a knight and a bishop against the rook, and I guess is approximately 3 pawns up at this point. Of course, he's going to lose some of these pawns, but after king e2, he is up 2 pawns, or 1 pawn, sorry. But of course, he is going to win these shortly, because they are disconnected, and white has 2 pawn islands to black's 4, and has a pawn up, and has a knight and a bishop against the rook. And this forced Chernikov's resignation. I think maybe most of the people would not have resigned in this position, but believe me or not, but after such a game where your opponent gives up the queen in the opening for seemingly nothing, and then completely annihilates you, probably it's reasonable to resign at this stage. So a completely amazing game, and I guess one of the most, how to describe it, one of the most surprising decisions that have ever occurred in chess, one of the most beautiful moves, is in this position where Nezhmetdinov played queen takes f6 and sacrificed his queen right from the opening. It's move 12. He sacrificed it for 2 pawns and an enormous attack that proved to be fatal. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments, please share them in the comments section. And brace yourselves, the number 1 on my list is coming. See you in the next video. Bye.